what, for each of you, like, did you have like a moment where you're like, when you sort of first discovered fan content, whether that was making it or like being part of the community or just seeing it, and if you could talk a bit about like what that was and sort of what the content was celebrating, whether that's like a show or a celebrity or a band or anything. So yeah, should we start with you now and go down?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a specific moment. I think when I think of sort of fan movements in a way, one of the things that really always stood out to me was like the Snyder Cut in a way. It was such like a huge moment for like people getting their way. And it was, well, like some of it was pretty toxic, to be fair. Like it wasn't all good. But I think it was one of those moments that you really saw how powerful people can be when they shout loud enough, essentially. And they sort of demand something that they really, really love and really want to see. So I think that was a really great moment for that.
Absolutely.
I would say that I never really had a relationship with fan content until I went into my post-grad course, and for some reason I had this like strange connection to Zayn Malik. I was just listening to his music all the time, and then I realized that like One Direction were this band that meant something to me, and I don't know why, but for the whole 2-year course I just made work about One Direction, and I didn't really choose to do that, and like I even wrote my like dissertation on them, and then like that turned into a book. But I discovered that through making these like artworks or like memes or discussion topics surrounding One Direction, I was realizing that actually like this band was something that actually I did quite probably enjoy listening to their music. I kind of probably fancied a few of the members when I was like 14 or something, or 15. And when I'm an adult, like 25, I realized that actually through kind of reaccessing One Direction in my adulthood, I was able to kind of renegotiate and re-experience this like sense of adolescence that I felt like I was missing. And so they became this really important thing for me to kind of talk about my identity. And so I think fan content is probably a really important part of my life now. But I don't know if I'm a directioner, but that's a different topic.
I think maybe my first experience with fan culture was I had an Instagram account, like a bit like the Benedict Cumberbatch one that you were talking about, back in the day, not now, when I was about 13, and I was just posting pictures of like those kinds of people, like Sherlock, Doctor Who, back when those things were very popular. And then obviously I don't post on that anymore. But more recently I wrote my dissertation on Riverdale, considering it as a form of melodrama, and considering its style and its audience. And yeah, so now it's more like I've grown up, but like not really.
I think for me, and perhaps showing my age, it was Tumblr in like the early 2000s, 2010s, where it was just like fandom was the lead thing, and it was horrific, and there was like fandom wars over like, I wasn't involved, but like I was certainly on the sidelines. But I think for me the key was when I was 15 and I became obsessed with Nicolas Cage's first film Valley Girl, to the point that even now I'm like the world's leading academic in it, because I forced myself to be and did my master's in it, and had all of these like industry focused conversations around legitimising the idea that like this film is the first teen rom-com that was feminist focused and really turned the tide of it, and just screaming constantly at that for me has been why I'm such a big fan lover of fans.
Amazing. I think that's really nice to hear, because it shows like the loads of different ways that we get into it, and like why we do that. And I think one of the things is like it can be quite difficult to work out what fan content is, because it can be like fan fiction, it can be just running a Twitter account or like a Tumblr account, it can be making edits, making memes. It's kind of like pretty broad. So I guess what I kind of would be interested to hear from all of you is, what do you think sets it apart from what we might call like more traditional like engagement or criticism with culture? So like we'd read like a review of the film, The Guardian, and be like, this clearly isn't fan content, and we'd see an edit and be like, this is. But are they not kind of doing the same thing? And if they're not, then like, what do you think the difference is? Like, when is something like legitimate traditional criticism, and when is it like deemed fan culture? What's the difference really?
I don't know, I could probably speak about that. I think with fan culture and edits, it comes from this place of authenticity. Like, these voices are kind of desperately wanting some kind of representation, so they're making these edits and they want that kind of authentic voice to be heard and not coming from positions of power. And I think an interesting discussion that's going on at the minute is this whole like talk about Jessie Nelson from Little Mix being racially ambiguous in her like new music video and just throughout her like career. And I think that I've noticed like on TikTok all these like edits and memes of her, and like they're actually kind of funny, but these memes are like really simple. They like say like 1,000 words in one way, and like fan edits don't, or fan culture doesn't have to come from this place of like worshipping someone or like being so obsessed with someone you make this like gay relationship with the two band members or something. It can be coming from this place of criticism and wanting to kind of upend these like power structures and making sure that people like Jessie Nelson are actually kind of being held accountable for something that is kind of like problematic or something that really shouldn't be kept going in the culture. So I think fan culture is a great way of engaging with like debates and topics and discussions that are really important in a way that's really accessible.
Well, I feel like a lot of sort of the real larger scale fan edits of stuff like there's the Star Wars Phantom Menace edit where they took out Jar Jar Binks, and that was obviously better than the actual original film. And a lot of like the Star Wars films have been re-edited to like even like a lot of the newer ones as well. Like, and because technology is so much more advanced than it was 20 years ago when Final Cut Pro became like really accessible for people, you can do like crazy levels of CGI now in work that already exists. So people have like done, I think The Last Jedi, they went and took out scenes and put in, there was a version of The Rise of Skywalker where they gave all of the Knights of Ren voices, because in the film they don't speak, which is fucking stupid, but they actually made them interesting and actually gave them like a point. So I think a lot of those, I think especially with Star Wars, because there's a lot of, the fan base there is very interesting, just like, do they love it, do they hate it? I think a lot of people just hate those films, but they're fans of them for some reason. A lot of that, it feels like, is always that sort of on that line. Is it criticism and it's sort of reinterpretation, reappropriation?
And I guess, yeah, so like, if fan content doesn't have to be like fan worship, and it can be like criticising and still engaging with it, is maybe what like sets it apart from, say, writing a review in like a more traditional way. Maybe like the creativity of it, or like you were saying, like the accessibility of it. Is that something that sort of, is that kind of what we would say? It's like you can do it on a phone, on an app that you're comfortable with, and you can have like more fun with it. You don't have to structure it in the same way, maybe.
I feel like it offers the audience a lot of agency. For example, in edits, like you can make your two favourite characters be together. You can carve your own narrative that doesn't exist in the show. So if you want Archie and Jughead to be together, you can make an edit where they kiss. That's like so powerful because you're basically like writing your own story. It's like, yeah, I feel like that's maybe a lot of the appeal for audiences, because you can just kind of build your own show basically. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess kind of on that note, if we can still be critical with it and we can be creative and like sort of exercise our own like agency and authority and do what we want with the content, then should fan content then be seen as a guilty pleasure? Is there anything about that should be seen as like stigmatized or like embarrassing? Because from the sounds of it, it's not like everything we've talked about. Like, it's creative and it's still critical. So do you think there is like a stigma around like being part of a fandom or like making fan content? And if you do you think there should be, or like do you think we should get rid of it?
I think it comes from where we're putting the emphasis on what is legitimate criticism, what is traditional criticism, and the power structures that exist around what we're allowed to call actual film criticism, cultural engagement, all of that stuff. You know, Sight and Sound put out a Godard issue every 6 months. If that's not fan behaviour, I don't know what is, but because it's coming from this accepted canon of culture, we don't call it fanfic, which essentially it is. We have to find a different way to consider that it's predominantly young people who are helming this like amazing creative trough of cultural engagement, we just don't have the language to engage with that properly in a way that doesn't then put it in opposition to what is already existing. And I think to call it a guilty pleasure ignores the fact that like maybe you should be ashamed of just like really loving Hitchcock and not currently conversations about like really important like social and cultural happenings that young people are engaging with this fan culture stuff.
Yeah, and I think like if you look at like the views, a show like Riverdale is getting many more views than it is getting reviews in a sense. Like the people are watching it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just like, there's nothing to be ashamed of really. But yeah, does anyone else kind of have a chip in on that?
I think like guilty pleasure is just like such a bad term, because like I always think with like, I don't know, making work about One Direction, it's like I know they're like, it's people think it's embarrassing, like there's that kind of association that making work about this boy band is like bizarre, but if you get to the grips of like what these celebrities, like the roles they play in our lives, and you understand that, like even that with the Shawn Mendes video, like if you understand that if someone is a fan of Shawn Mendes, like it's not an embarrassing thing. It's like maybe they're a fan of him because they see a bit of themselves within him. And I think to suggest that being a fan of someone is like, oh, bad, it's like, I like listening to Taylor Swift, and I feel like my lots of nods. There's some Swifties, but I feel like some of my friends like hate her so much, and I'm like, I get embarrassed. Like I'm looking at you, I get embarrassed to kind of like acknowledge that I like Taylor Swift. But it's like if you actually understand like the poetry of her work and all this kind of stuff and all these like associations, blah 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 blah, you actually understand that she's actually a great songwriter and all these other things, but because she's been stigmatized in the media so like brutally, you get this bizarre association that if you're a Swiftie, it's like you're, I don't know, it's like...
I guess it's just deemed lowbrow, essentially.
Yeah, lowbrow, I hate that as well, yeah.
And I guess we've decided that, Goddard, doing an issue on him every 6 months, that's fine, because it's, it's Goddard. Whereas if someone was to do the exact same thing for something that's been deemed a little bit more accessible, essentially, to everyone, then less cool, man.
I want an issue on Taylor Swift, please. I'd read that. every 1 month.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was like Oxford or something, they set up the first uni Taylor Swift society, so that could be a model. But I think, first of all, I meant to put guilty pleasure in like inverted commas, because again, it's not, I don't think fan content is a guilty pleasure, I don't think it's a useful phrase, but it can be seen that way. But I think there's another sort of aspect to this, which is when you're kind of working with characters, say, some fictional characters, I think you can kind of quite easily, without being like concerned about it, like we were saying, be creative and make them do whatever you want. You can twist the original writer's narrative to the point where it's unrecognisable. But what I find interesting when you're dealing with actual people, so Stella, your piece kind of like merged all those universes, and like you can, it's fiction. And you can make characters do what they want, you can put different tracks over it and things. But with something like yours, Hugo, do you think when you're dealing with a real person, does that kind of raise kind of different questions? Because I think, like you discussed it in the piece as well, it's if Shawn Mendes was a character in a TV show, everyone could just say he's gay and like believe that. He's a real person who might push back against that. Do you think that kind of raises different issues, or should we sort of treat celebrities in the same way that we sort of treat characters in a sort of film or TV show?
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting question. I had a huge like kind of discussion with myself about using like for this like art show I did. I'd made like this unmade bed, and I like suggested, I was like, Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson like had sex in this bed, and there was like all these used condoms over and like this lube and like poppers and stuff, and I was like do I feel bad by using these like real people with like real lives and like real identities and like subverting them for my kind of gain, or like my wanting to understand my queer identity in a way that is like more I don't know, through them? And I think I came to this like understanding that even with Shawn Mendes is like, okay, he hates that people call him gay, but I think when you're in like this position of power and you're a celebrity, you have this platform of discussion with people, and I think people really don't kind of understand that. Well, for me anyway, it's like maybe subconscious or consciously, celebrities really do impact identity formations, and it's like even with like boy bands, for example, when you're growing up or like in your bedroom and you see a boy band on TV, it's like this was my like awakening. It was like watching X Factor. It was like my mum was like, "Oh, do you like Cher Lloyd?" And I was like, "Oh, well, maybe." But like in my head, I was like, "No, I actually like Harry Styles or like Liam Payne or something." And then, but I would never say that. But it's like with a boy band, and through that formation, you understand like actually, maybe I like boys, or maybe this made me think I like girls, or maybe I like whatever it is. So it's they have this power over our lives that they're probably not necessarily aware of, but they shouldn't shy away from, because they've put themselves up there for kind of like speculation and all these identity kind of constructions and deconstructions. And I think it's kind of like fair game in a way, because they're so far removed from our lives, they may as well be fictional characters.
I think that's a really good point.
I feel like we all fall in love with like fictional characters. You know, we do. It's not, but like no one ever like sees that as like a legitimate form in a way of like infatuation in a way, because you don't know them, because you've never met them, but you're seeing their lives through like whatever it is, social media. You're seeing everything on a sort of day-to-day life. So having those connections with these people who you've never met, and you probably never will. But I think is in a way quite a legitimate, our character Rock falling in love with Luke from 5 Seconds of Summer is, I think, in a way, if you're seeing someone like Shawn Mendes, where you're seeing them sort of grow up from like such young age, people like One Direction, whereas you're seeing them from a really, really young age under the microscope for such a long time, you form these connections with these bands and these artists and whatever it is. And I think that's such a legitimate form of, human connection in a way. So it's very, very, and obviously, it does sort of essentially suck for them that they're having their sort of lives analysed at every single turn. But I think the connections that you form with them are sort of inevitable and completely fair.
And I think like that kind of brings me on to Megan earlier, who were talking about sort of the kind of almost where power sits, like who gets to decide what is legitimate and what isn't. And again, we were talking about power again, with these celebrities have a power over us, and how they use that and how we let them use that is also something that's kind of, we can affect that through how we sort of make content about them. So I'm kind of interested in talking about like what kinds of people feel drawn to fan content and why that might be, and what could sort of, what they see in it that they wouldn't see in what we call like a traditional industry space. So Stella, I know that your piece was predominantly sort of female characters. It was a female song, a great female song, but that's just me. But do you think there's something about sort of the kind of shows or the kind of films that sort of are seen as more for women, that maybe because of that they don't get the attention? So if you look at Succession, a show that everyone seems to be talking about, or like Ted Lasso, which looks really boring, but I don't know, maybe it's good. But like they're sort of more geared for a masculine audience, and I think shows like, say, The New Gossip Girl, which I think is great, aren't getting the same like critical attention. They're not getting the Emmy nominations. They're not getting the sort of BAFTA nominations. Do you think because of that people feel sort of female audiences and the shows they like, they feel sort of more comfortable making their own space for it, or would that be sort of me reading too much into it?
No, I completely agree with that. I think quite often, just teenage girls' opinions and young women's opinions just aren't like taken seriously. Like obviously, Beatlemania, young girls loved the Beatles, weren't taken seriously, and then once the music critics found them, like blah blah. And so I feel like young girls are like the tastemakers. I might be biased. Young girls are like discovering these things and raving about them, but no one's taking them seriously because it's like, oh, it's just teen TV or teen films. And so maybe we have to make our own spaces to and find our own little like communities to talk about these characters with. Yeah, my piece was all girls, wasn't it?
That's like the Call Me By Your Name scene, but yeah, other than that, I think.
Yeah. But they're good characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's quite like a girl rage song. I don't know. I allowed a few boys. Steve Harrington, he's like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess like kind of similar to that as well. Another sort of, maybe this is sort of what I've seen, but there tends to be a lot of sort of queer audiences for fan content. And I think that can be because maybe a lot of times you'll get like characters who are queer coded, so it's like you can see it, but they're not going to come out and say it, or maybe there's just no representation at all. So you're sort of like, I want to see people like me on screen. I need to make that happen. I need to ship these characters together, even though they don't get together or whatever. Do you think, kind of for anyone really, like, do you think that's also a thing of sort of that agency specifically can draw into queer audiences who might not see much mainstream representation?
I would think that yes, it's queer audiences, but I think you could also like kind of think about queerness as this idea of just essentially being othered from like the mainstream, or so that can extend to all other types of othering, like either it's like racial othering or for your gender or anything like that. So I think essentially people that are using fan content or a direct relationship to a celebrity or a musician or an artist is like they're trying to find a space for them to just be who they want to be without all these like outside pressures saying like you have to do this, you have to conform, you have to code switch when you go certain places, you have to be like this or dress like that. And I think that there's been like this kind of like noticeable kind of change in how artists are using like their kind of art in a way to talk to people who feel like this. Like if you take for example like Lady Gaga had like Chromatica, or like Lil Nas X has like this world of Montero. It's like they're building these worlds because they know their community of fans who interact with them want to come to a space where they can engage with each other and just be who they want to be. There's no other just like pressures. And I think that relationship is being recognized as an important relationship. And obviously it's cynically being used as like this marketing tactic by these artists to say like, oh, like, come join our world, blah, 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 and it's all like a capitalist gain system. But at the heart of it, I think it's something quite pure and honest, and that is needed, kind of.
And I think another sort of group, you've all kind of talked about this in your own different ways that engage with fan content, is obviously young people. Like, I don't know, maybe there are sort of like people making like Midsummer Murders fan edits. I've not seen any, maybe I'm not the target audience, but do you think there's, like a lot of you were saying, you sort of grew up with or kind of through these characters, whether they're sort of real figures or sort of fictional characters, and kind of they're a big impact on your youth? So Hugo, you were saying like it connects you back to your adolescence, or kind of it's something you start as a teenager and maybe sort of grow out of. How do you think like being young and sort of being like what does being young lend itself to when it comes to sort of fan content? Why do young people feel sort of attached to it?
What's the power thing I feel like generally is, I guess, is from a lot of people it feels like when you're not in charge of the construction, these characters are not in charge of so much in your life, but you feel these such like fundamental connections to these characters. I think then sort of reappropriating them and sort of taking charge of those narratives and creating your own, whether it's like fan edits. I think things like sort of TikTok and YouTube obviously made all of these things so much more accessible and easy to share, and you know, finding communities through Reddit and shit like that is always, it's been really great for people finding each other. But I think it's just sort of reclaiming a certain narrative when you're young and feeling a little powerless. You can connect with these characters in even deeper ways.
There's also, I mean, these spaces online now, like TikTok, which I absolutely adore, are just reclaiming this space that young people haven't had in media or the larger industry to have these conversations, and creating these own spaces in these languages. Young people are forging these amazing, like, you know, troves of talent. Like the edits that we saw today are better than like anything that I've seen at London Film Festival, sorry. But we're having to have that space created for ourselves, by, you know, for young people, by young people, because we're not seeing that accepted in the industry as legitimate forms of expression of talent and of, you know, amalgamizing everything that we're seeing with culture happening right now. It's a really exciting and dynamic time, I think, especially with online and the pandemic really exacerbating everything that we've seen with young people having that space. But it's also really concerning because we're looking at a future where young people are having to have that space themselves because we're not being taken seriously in the sector. And I think it's really exciting that we're seeing young people just say actually we don't need this legitimised because we understand that we have this language with each other and that's enough.
There's loads that I want to get into there about like what we can do to kind of give young people that platform and whether that should be in the industry or like you're saying kind of outside. But I want to pick up on what you were both saying about platforms like TikTok, like Tumblr and Wattpad and things. Hugo, in your piece you kind of mentioned that decades ago it might have been you put up a poster on your bedroom wall, now you make a TikTok or you make an edit. And obviously that means a lot more people see it. So now that we're talking about like fan content and what it is has it always been there and now it's just because TikTok is really easy to watch, everything on TikTok's being seen more? Or is there something about platforms like TikTok, like YouTube, Instagram, that actually like lends itself more to fan content? Like is it just that fan content lives there because that's where everything is? Or is there something specific about those like platforms and about social media that like has given fan content an extra boost as well?
I mean, I would argue that not enough people on TikTok are seeing my Steve Buscemi.
Feel free to like drop your ad as well in case.
Oh, they're really embarrassing. But I think that especially for TikTok, which I think TikTok's going to be the next cinema, like death to cinema venues, TikTok's going to be it. That we're just having a space now where it's so easy to create all this stuff, but also that we've moved into a stage of like hyper consumption and like late capitalism that everything is so big now in every sense, but that is also giving way to really intimate conversations as well. And I think that when we're looking at these online spaces, especially TikTok, we're seeing that want to be speaking to loads of people, but also having that really intimate connection when we're doing so. And I think that within those lines, we're going to see some really important conversations being had about representation, about queer culture, about class, gender, race, everything that's not being given a legitimate platform within these spaces. Whether that can translate into spaces where we're given legitimate consideration, I don't know.
I guess that kind of then brings me on to a lot, like to kind of time up a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. Do you think the industry, and that can be sort of, let's say, the cultural industry or film, TV, sort of publishing, whatever, but like, do you think the sort of traditional establishment is doing enough to, like, what we've just seen, but also just the huge communities that there are? Like, if you're trying to reach people and you're trying to engage people, they're there, they want to engage. Do you think the industry is kind of doing enough to harness that energy, to bring those people on board and say, we want you and we're going to welcome you? Or do you think like fan content's kind of been pushed aside a bit by the people who have that power, at least for now?
I don't yet believe that like big industry, especially like the film industry, they're nearly there, I think, with understanding the power of like internet communities. I think they're close, but I think because it's still run by essentially the same people who've been running it for decades, I think when people of sort of this generation, people who grew up with the internet, start getting into sort of greater positions of power, I think at that point the true power of where you can like targeting audiences will become so much more apparent, and people who've grown up with an understanding of what these communities can actually do and how you find audiences and how you target audiences. That's, I think, I don't think it'll happen for a while, but I think that's something that will eventually happen because it's inevitable.
I think we're seeing like more and more of it pop up. Like, for example, on TikTok, like there's an account for The Office, the TV show, on TikTok, and they'll post like memes and like they'll post like little mini edits and stuff. But it's like, who's running that? Some like unpaid intern who's like 20. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's companies will take it on or like brands or TV shows will take it on because it gets them views and because it gets attention. But like, for example, the sex education, I think we were talking about the sex education Twitter account. Like they changed their username to No Context Sex Education, and then they just post like screen caps with like funny lines. But then it's like, how much of that is purposefully written into the script so they can post those so that it will get engagement on Twitter. I think it's a lot of like, there's like quite a clever way of doing it where it's like, it's serving fans, but is kind of catering to them. I'm not sure. It's quite like an interesting dynamic, but I think you're seeing more of that kind of stuff cropping up recently.
Yeah, Fresh Prince, like YouTube video came out like a while ago. Then I don't know if this was actually real, but someone did like a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air kind of like YouTube video where it was like as if it was like rebooting it for the like dark, gritty audience kind of thing. I don't know if that actually ever like got off the ground, but then they are rebooting Fresh Prince, and I feel like there was like whispers about that being the sort of start of that. So I mean, that was something that started off as a YouTube video, and then someone saw the potential in that being a real thing. So I think there are instances, and you do hear instances of, you know, people doing, I don't know, talk shows, game shows. Like, look at Lily Singh, man. Like she was a YouTuber who then he's got a talk show. Like, don't get me wrong, it's trash, but he's got it. So I mean, it clearly people, execs and people higher up are seeing that there are YouTube personalities and they're trying things. They're failing, but they're trying. I think they'll nearly get it right at some point in the future, but they're not there yet.
But I guess like that leads me on to, clearly people have seen that there is a market here and there is an audience here we should be engaging with. But are they doing anything to bring those people in, or is it kind of like the sex education thing is like, it would be like one unpaid intern or just one person in the marketing department? It's kind of taking the communities and the ways of like making content that fans have built up and saying, oh, thanks for that, we'll take it and like we'll do it ourselves now, rather than like bring the people who have like shaped that and put the work in, who have fought the like fandom battles for years and are like battle scum, and being like, no, do you know what, we'll bring you in and like you clearly know what you're doing. Is it kind of almost like appropriating that and sort of saying like, thanks for doing this, we'll take it from here, and like you guys just go back to being those quiet like fans who just consume what we tell you to? Do you think that's happening, or do you think like actually these things that we've talked about, like things like the Snyder Cut or sort of like shows having that social media presence is actually like part of like it's bringing those people in, or is it just kind of like taking what they've done and doing it themselves?
I mean, I think fans recognise fans. Like, I run a Nicolas Cage, Europe's longest running Nicolas Cage film festival, and the world's only Keanu Reeves film festival. And there's other cinemas and certainly festivals that have tried to replicate things like that, but we do it because we are insane and we love it, and not because we understand that like Keanu is an internet meme, even though we have that language and that ability to have, you know, conversations about that. So I think that when we're seeing, whether it's big companies, you know, online using it for social media, or within film festivals starting to have it in the peripheries, that if it's not sincere and it's not really tapping into the people who are genuinely making this content, then the audiences won't come. Why would you engage with something that feels really half-arsed and not necessarily sincere? So I think that it's also a question about, would you want that to exist in these types of spaces? Does fan content then lose a certain type of legitimacy, a certain type of sincerity when it's taken out of the context that it's produced in, or that has found a home in, whether it's the internet platforms or, you know, in forums or whatever it may be? And I think that that's a bigger conversation about why fan content even exists and what's the purpose of it. Because if it's co-opted, if next year at the London Film Festival for fans is like the opening gala, will it have this, you know, will Beyonce turn up to that? Will anybody have that?
Invite to this.
She's hiding here. But I think that's a bigger question about, what do we as young people who are making this stuff, who really enjoy it, who love it, where do we want to see it? I mean, yes, it'd be amazing if like the, you know, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, like gritty like Snyder Cut came out, but is that then going to have the same type of authenticity as like watching a 5-minute YouTube video?
Yeah. And I think that like leads me quite nicely. We'll go to questions in a second as well, but I think for like my last question to you was like, as people who engage with fan content, people who make it, if there was like one thing that you kind of like to see change in terms of how fan content is received, or one thing like the industry can do, what do you think that would be? Or are you kind of happy with how things are going now and you like it kind of being its own space? But yeah, like what if you could change one thing, like what would it be?
I think young people need to be crueler when it comes to wanting to be in the sector in any space, whether it's making films, screening films, or creating stuff like this. I think that as we've seen today, like the youth talent pool is insane. It's all self-created as well. It's all self-generated. And actually, when we're looking at these larger corporations or festivals or industry, like they're the poorer ones for not having young people in the sector. So actually, the power lies with young people who are creating this content and looking at, you know, a sector withering on the vine because they can't get under 30s through the door because they're scared of Twitter.
And like right now, you're hearing as well that there's a big shortage of like skills in the film industry, but there's kind of not. Like you're all here.
If anyone wants an editor, please, I'm unemployed.
Yeah, hi Stella. Yeah, what about the rest of you? Like, what would you like to see anything change? What, or were you happy with how things are?
I don't know. I feel like my relationship with fan content isn't something that's like mine comes from this like strange fine art approach where that's just a whole kind of realm in itself, which I don't necessarily like enjoy. And so bringing in fan content into that, I always feel like an outsider within that. So it's like I've never kind of, maybe it's just unconsciously that I've existed in this like, I mean, I post stuff on TikTok like One Direction stuff, but it's like I exist in this fan world, and it's like, I think as it is, it's quite pure and genuine, and it's like, I have this book that I wrote, my dissertation is called One Direction Futurism, and so I just do little things on that on TikTok, and through just posting that, I found like this whole community like across the world of like people really engaging with One Direction, not because they like the band, but because they actually stand for something like that means something to them about like, I don't know, because there's this whole like narrative of them being like this queer kind of like symbols of stuff. And so there's people that are reading this book just to like learn English, or they like do some like video of it in like another language, and I have no idea what they're saying. But it's like, it's really wholesome because I think fan generated communities are really communities because they have this shared likeness, and they're like want to talk to each other, and they want to find connection with other people in the world. And so I think if it would change, if these big corporations came in and decided like we're going to do all this fan stuff, I think it brings this level of cynicism that's not needed, because as it is right now, it's just like a humble vibe, which I love.
Yeah, there's a certain level of sort of it being very organic, I think, and people can always tell when things aren't completely legitimate. And I think it's always nice when you see like a director of a film or an actor in a film who's genuinely clearly a fan of the work and clearly a fan of the source material, if it's, you know, a book or a comic or whatever it is. It's always lovely to see that. But I think you can't shoehorn that. I think that's got to be something that comes from genuine love and passion for whatever it is that's being made. So I think it's not something that can... I think I like the idea that it's just something you've got to build very, very slowly, and if you're a big fan of something, then you sort of just have to dedicate yourself to that. That's the only way forward, I think. I can't lie, I hate corporate like TikToks when it's like people on set, like, you know, Reese Witherspoon, do a dance. It's like, fuck no, I can see this. And I think, and again, there are some like celebrities and there are people on set and doing stuff it's organic again. You can see that it's like this person's having fun and doing cool stuff. And there's lots of really cool filmmaking stuff on TikTok that we've all seen, I'm sure, like in the bloke with the drone, all sorts. Like there's lots of great stuff going on, but then you can always tell when it's like someone's told them to do this. So I mean, I'd rather just them stay away personally. But yeah, I think it's sort of untapped potential there for someone doing something really, really clever and being really great with their marketing campaign, but I don't think anyone's cracked it yet.
I made the mistake of introducing Cinemas of the Southwest to TikTok through like a BFI thing, and now there's a couple of like independent cinemas in the southwest of England who are trying TikTok, and they just haven't understood it. Like lots of them are like instruction videos of how to get in their venue, but like not edited at all, just like straight raw. And even like the BFI, like the film festival, have a TikTok, and there's like one TikTok from last year, and it begins with start, and then like the person speaks. So I think there's something again really interesting about like these companies, these organisations, these venues, these festivals trying to use TikTok because they don't understand it, and instead of giving that over to someone who might understand that and actually paying a young person who has that knowledge, like EasyJet or Ryanair, one of them do it like pretty well, and Turner Movie Classics actually does it amazing, but the rest of the stuff you can really like taste the desperation in the TikToks, and that's just, you don't want that. You need to have that, like, and it's not like, you know, only young people can do TikTok, but it's about the language and the, you know, if you can't work out how to turn your camera on, do you know what I mean? We've still got an industry that's struggling to like really understand how to retweet things. So it's a big ask to say, okay, we're now going to be doing elaborate TikToks for like an elderly generation running culture.
I mean, just out of interest, I didn't know London Film Festival had a TikTok.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear, like, if you've got TikTok in the audience, could you just put your hands up? Okay. And if you came to London Film Festival, which you've all done, did you see London Film Festival's TikToks? Put your hands up. There we go, yeah. Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up, really.
I think something that's I've seen cropping up on Tumblr and Instagram recently has been like what you're saying about that thematic, that good for you moment where you see them with someone else. There's been quite a lot of there'll be like kind of, I don't know what they're called, there must be a name, but it's sort of like a thematic thing. So you'd have like a line from a book where you see them with someone else, then you'd have like a screenshot from Gilmore Girls, then you'd have like a painting, and then you'd have a quote from someone, and they're all about the same theme, and people do them on like carousels on Instagram or on like Tumblr posts. I don't know what they're called, but it's like people are taking a theme and then like finding different like practices that consider this theme, different like works of art, and like kind of collating them together, which I find that's really interesting. I don't feel like I've answered your question properly, but like I think, yeah, I kind of tried to do that obviously just with TV and film, but yeah, just taking those of different moments and kind of making them into one story.
I think in terms of like analysis and criticism and stuff like that, I do think, yeah, fan re-edits of films are always super interesting for that in terms of like what they decide to like fix, because what they're doing is problem solving in a way. Like it's a really effective form of like, we've decided that these things are wrong with this film and I'm going to change it. So the Phantom Menace edit I mentioned earlier, other than just getting rid of Jar Jar Binks, they also like changed a bunch of character moments for Luke, not Luke, fucking Anakin, and instead of him being like a shit character basically, they removed certain bits that made it like don't start Rock. Whereas like instead of him like killing some people by mistake, which doesn't really make sense for him being like the most powerful Jedi ever, they actually made it intentional, and they did like these little moments here and there where, oh yeah, George Lucas, you missed the trick, man. Like that was really silly of you. And it's sort of going back and seeing all the problems with something and going and cutting it up and changing it and making it better is a completely valid and reasonable form of criticism. It's very well done.
Yeah, and I just add on, like, my dissertation about One Direction, like, okay, it was about One Direction, but it was actually about really critically discussing and analysing power structures of, like, whiteness and heteronormativity and toxic masculinity and all these really kind of intense subjects that I was able to explore with like a really like an academic criticality, but I was only able to do that because I had this foundation of One Direction as this boy band that for me had these like that operated within all these power structures. So it was like, if you take for example this boy band, like all these members are white facing except obviously Zayn, but then Zayn left the band because he felt like he was othered. So this all talks about these big ideas that we think about and that we face, but it's an easy and accessible way to think about those subjects. So I think fan content can be a really great way to actually critically engage with topics that might seem really heavy or overwhelming, but it is actually can be made accessible and really intuitive. Yeah, I think those things go hand in hand, and it's like people apply the term queer baiting to people like Harry Styles, really, or Shawn Mendes, because obviously it's a fictional term, what writers, when they kind of suggest queer representation but actually deny it. And when queer baiting is used, what it does, it actually invalidates queer identities, and it makes a viewer or a reader feel like that actually, if you're queer, that you should be ashamed or you should feel like this because what you want so desperately is going to be denied from you. So, for example, like people like Shawn Mendes, who actually kind of adapt, and Harry Styles as well, adapt this like hybridized form of masculinity where they paint their nails and they wear like sheer mesh tops, or they do all these things that 30 years ago or 40 years ago, people who did that would have been really persecuted for and even like lose their lives, for example. And they don't understand that they were these trailblazers and they just get to like adapt that. And I think that for people like Shawn to keep feeling like he wants to like not be accused of being gay, it plays into all these like all these kind of really toxic fears and things that queer people feel like, and it's like he's at the top of his game and all these things, and it's like, hold on, like these issues need to be addressed properly, and I don't think he quite understands the level of, I don't know, power that he has and what he does. I don't know. I like his music sometimes, and whatever, but I don't know.
I think that's a really important note to kind of end on. That I could talk about this for hours, but we do need to start wrapping up. But I think I've really enjoyed talking to all four of you and watching the commissions and seeing everyone make some amazing zines earlier as well. I think what we've got out of this, like fan content, is serious work. It is authentic, it is important. Also, kind of we shouldn't take it seriously. Like, it's serious as it is. Let's not kill it by taking it. It's kind of a weird balance that we need to like think about. But I think it's just been such a pleasure to talk to all of you. I think we've got loads out of it, and yeah, please just join me in thanking the panel.